For our Devar Torah this morning, we're honored to have Kevin Lefkowitz with us. As you know, Kevin grew up here at Congregation Beth Yeshurun, and he's studying to be a rabbi at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles. Kevin's just finishing up his 4th year. It's hard to believe. There's 1 year left. He'll be spending the fall semester in Israel, and then next spring you'll be graduating just over a year from now. So hopefully you got to pass. I remember those final exams. They're not easy. But Kevin, it's an honor to have you here, address the congregation. It's a pleasure to have your grandmother here, your proud parents, and your girlfriend, Melissa. Melissa's studying to be a rabbi at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, and she'll also be joining you in Israel this fall. So it's a pleasure to have you here as well, Melissa. So again, Kevin, thank you for being here. We now look forward to your Devar Torah.
Why do we need Passover? Do we celebrate this holiday out of tradition or ritual, or is there an additional value that we get about talking about freedom for 8 days every year? Come to think of it, what is freedom? To answer these rhetorical questions, I'd like to spend a minute on a Talmudic machloket, or debate, that analyzes the formulation of the Seder and how our ancient rabbis viewed our people's origin story. In the Talmud, in Tractate Psachim 116a, we read about the order of the Seder and that we are supposed to matchil bignut umesayem b'shevach, to begin with disgrace and end with praise. Ending with praise makes sense. We praise God for redeeming the people, taking us out of Egypt. But what is gnut? Disgrace. 2 rabbis, Rav and Shmuel, had the same question, and indeed debate what we're really supposed to begin with in the story. What is gnut? Rav says to begin with gnut means to begin the storytelling portion of the Haggadah by stating that our ancestors were once idol worshippers, and now we follow the Torah. We follow God. His counterpart Shmuel said no. It literally means that we are once slaves in bondage and God freed us, and that's the trajectory of the story. But I think this is more than a debate about what to say at the Seder, but rather what does freedom mean? Rav believes in a mental freedom of the mind. What made the Israelites a distinct people was the idea that we follow God and an emphasis on values found in the Torah. While we once listened and followed the intellectual and philosophical beliefs of the time and the people around us, we now have the ability to think for ourselves. We used to be idol worshippers. Now we have a unique sense of purpose that guides our lives. We are free to think what we want. Shmuel argues that the story is a matter of physical freedom. Once we were slaves in Egypt, but God took us out of bondage and gave us the ability to determine our own fate. The Israelites became a people at Sinai because we accepted the Torah, and we only could have gotten there once we escaped the shackles of Egyptian bondage. Now we have the freedom to do what we want. And of course, both opinions are found in the Haggadah today because both are integral to what makes a person free. And I am unfortunately here to tell you that even though we live in the United States of America, where freedom rings, we are indeed not free. We enjoy the physical freedom that Shmuel talks about. We can pray and we can live as we wish, and we can even use technology to connect us with people all around the world, but that very technology has us trapped in a sort of modern Egypt, in an example of the mental slavery that Rav feared. Netflix released a documentary last year called The Social Dilemma, in which experts discuss the dangers social media has brought into our lives, and dangers they know very well because they created them. And without spoiling anything, I think you should see it for yourselves. These experts discuss what's called persuasive technology, and this is something my sister actually took a class on at A&M. It's called persuasive technology, and how engineers tap into human psychology to predict and then influence human behavior. For example, companies designed apps to trigger our deeply wired responses to keep us glued to our phones. So you know how you have to slide the phone in a downward motion to check if you have any new emails or new Instagram posts, and sometimes it'll pop up and sometimes it doesn't. What does that remind you of? They do this to maximize the amount of time that we stay on the app. So we see the advertisements, and that's how they make money. It's a business. And it may be free for us to use, but as they say in the documentary, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. In the documentary, it says there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. That's no coincidence. And while I was just told that the term for users is older than social media, I think it still fits. These companies find patterns in our behavior and then, by means of suggestion, push inflammatory articles on us without a way to fact-check these articles. To take advantage of the limited amount of time that our ever-shortening attention span allows, websites, talk radio, and news sources are becoming increasingly biased to cater to what they believe the reader wants to, or listener wants to, or is most likely to read or hear. After all, when it comes to the internet, we're most likely to notice and see ads on inflammatory information. And the more we read this inflammatory information and click, the more in our bubble of political views, the more polarized we become. It's a downward spiral. I tested it recently and typed a particular news source and a headline. I was looking for a specific article on a source that I don't typically read into Google. The first 8 results were articles written about that news source, and the rest of the first page were articles written by other sites on that certain topic. I was literally looking for a specific article and I couldn't find it on Google. That is why we need the annual Seder and Passover, because we're not really free. German poet and philosopher Johann von Goethe once pointed out that, quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." We believe we have control over our lives and behavior because we have the physical freedom, but we don't have as much control as we think because we lack Rob's freedom of the mind. We think what we are pushed to think and therefore do what we are pushed to do. Now for the solution. Our solution is in a prayer that we say every day, Aleinu. Literally translated to on us, this prayer tells us that it is our obligation to pray to God and create the world in which we wish to live. It might seem counterintuitive to tell an enslaved people that it's on them to free themselves, but as stated before, this is a different type of slavery. Because slavery of the mind works differently than slavery of the body, it requires a different path to freedom. It is aleinu, it is on us, to examine ourselves and look for actions that we take that don't necessarily match our values. And perhaps most importantly, to listen when other people point it out for us. When other people identify the ways that we might be trapped in a mental slavery, we have the responsibility to free ourselves by hearing them out and acting accordingly. I learned this from Dr. Rex Marco, who spoke at Beth Yeshurun a few months ago when Rabbi Strauss interviewed him. And after becoming quadriplegic after a tragic bicycle accident, Dr. Marco called on everyone to put ourselves into the shoes of the other. He asked those of us who are able-bodied to consider what it might be like not to have the ability to walk down a flight of stairs or to navigate public transportation, a lot of which is inaccessible. Rabbi Strauss quoted the words of Dr. Oliver Sacks, who called on us not to see people for what they can't do as a hindrance, but rather what they can do as children of God. Dr. Marco recognized that these things are difficult. He admittedly struggles with them himself, but charged us all with the task to do our best to listen when people ask for help, that what they're doing is shining a light on a spot that we might not have previously seen. Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles argues that societal rules only have power over those who don't know they exist. But once we identify them, then we are halfway to overcoming them. I believe this also applies to slavery of the mind. What it means to be mentally free is to accept the paradoxical notion that mental slavery is both inevitable and only effective when people don't see it or they deny it. So while we come to the end of this Passover holiday of freedom, I want to leave us with a charge of action. Look at the way that other people influence you. Celebrate the physical freedom that we have, but be open to the ways that you might be trapped in a slavery of thought. And when someone identifies a blind spot of yours, listen to them and thank them. They just might help you escape modern Egypt. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.